For most of us, sex is driven by desire, connection, and love. For the Spartans, it was none of those things. It was a command, a biological duty enforced by the state for one single mission: to forge the deadliest human weapons the ancient world would ever face. Spartans weren't raised as people, they were built as soldiers. And their creation didn't start on the battlefield. It began in the bedroom. Forget the myth of the red cloaks and noble speeches. Behind the legend of the 300 lies a disturbing truth. A cold system of human engineering so severe it makes the darkest dystopias seem almost merciful. At the core of this machine was absolute state control over reproduction. In Sparta, personal choice meant nothing when it came to love or family. The government acted as the only matchmaker, pairing citizens based on strength, not sentiment. Old magistrates, men hardened by decades, examined young males like livestock, judging height, stamina, and lineage. He was the tall, broad-shouldered warrior, born of decorated ancestors. She was the strong, fertile woman with wide hips and the sturdy frame. Beauty mattered, not for vanity, but as a signal of good health, of better blood. Marriages were state-arranged, cold, strategic unions meant to produce superior offspring. Love was irrelevant. Desire was unparalleled. The body no longer belonged to the individual. It belonged to Sparta. Every citizen's duty was to strengthen the state through their bloodline. Women's roles, too, were twisted into something unfamiliar. They were not seen as wives or mothers, but as vessels of the Spartan nation. Their worth came from their ability to bear strong, healthy children. From an early age, Spartan girls trained not for combat, but for childbirth. They ran, wrestled, and threw javelins, all to condition their bodies to carry warriors. Their will didn't matter, their bodies did. They were taught that their battlefield was the birthing bed, and their greatest honor was to bring forth a future soldier. But this system went even further into realms that seem almost monstrous today. What happened when a celebrated warrior's wife couldn't conceive, or when she gave birth to weak children? What if elsewhere lived a woman of exceptional health, married to an older, less improved man? In its social code, Sparta allowed, even encouraged, a strong warrior to father a child with another man's wife. It wasn't seen as adultery, it was civic duty. A woman's womb could be loaned in service of the state, and often her husband agreed. Producing a strong child, even by another man, was considered an honor to the household and to Sparta itself. Concepts like love or fidelity were crushed beneath the boots of state eugenics. The goal wasn't happiness, it was perfection of the bloodline. And so, when a Spartan child was finally born, it wasn't a time of celebration, it was a test. The newborn wasn't placed in its mother's arms, but taken to a grim place called the Lesh, the gathering hall. There, a group of aged warriors known as the Gerousia awaited. Men who had seen countless battles and looked at life through the eyes of death. They examined each child without emotion. Naked and trembling, the baby was inspected from head to toe. Its legs, its spine, its cry. Every flaw, every sign of weakness could seal its fate. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. To Spartan logic, it was necessity. They were a small warrior caste, surrounded by enemies and enslaved helots who outnumbered them 10 to 1. In such a world, weakness meant danger, not just for one child, but for the entire city. A frail infant wasn't just a burden, it was a threat. Mercy today could mean destruction tomorrow. Sparta's creed was survival through strength, no exceptions. The council's decision was final. There was no appeal. If the baby passed the test, it was returned to its family, not as a son, but as a future soldier, already belonging to the state. From the moment he drew his first breath, a Spartan child's destiny was already decided. But if the elders' judgment turned against him, if they ruled he was unfit for life, his end came in a way far colder. The infant was carried to the barren slopes of Mount Taygetus, to a place called the Apothei, the deposits. There, in a dark cleft of stone, the newborn was left to the wind, the night frost, and the beasts. A quiet death, unseen of and unspoken of. To Spartan logic, this was not murder. They believed they were merely returning to nature what nature had produced imperfectly, a grim offering to collective strength.
Passing the elders' inspection was only the beginning. From that moment, the child's life became a slow march toward war. And for his parents, duty did not end with birth. The state demanded more, constant creation of new bodies to fuel its war machine. Procreation in Sparta wasn't a privilege, it was an obligation. They practiced what we would later call eugenics, centuries before the word existed. The belief that humankind could be perfected through selective breeding didn't begin in the laboratories of the 20th century. It was born in these rocky hills. For the Spartans, it wasn't hatred that drove it, but ruthless practicality. Weakness had no place in their bloodline. To achieve this, the most private human act became a public duty. Love, as we understand it, had no place in the formula. Men lived from age 7 to 30 in communal barracks among their comrades. Husbands would sneak from camp under darkness to lie briefly with their wives, quietly, hurriedly, and vanish before sunrise to avoid punishment. There was no household life, no time to nurture affection. The wife was a stranger chosen for her body, not her heart. Their union had one goal: conception. Once a child was expected, the man returned to his true family, the army. The system was built to crush attachment, to ensure devotion only to Sparta. Strong family bonds were viewed as potential betrayal, romantic love a dangerous distraction. And so, the state punished those who refused to marry or reproduce. A man who stayed single beyond the required age was branded disloyal, a deserter of his civic duty.
During certain festivals, these men were paraded naked through the streets, forced to sing mocking songs about their failure. They were denied the honors granted to respected elders, treated as outcasts, living proof that private life in Sparta was everyone's business. The cost of this ideology was immense. Compassion faded from daily life. Generation after generation was conditioned to believe tenderness was weakness, that one's body belonged not to the self but to the state, and that motherhood was not love but service. Children didn't learn affection from their parents. They learned obedience from their trainers. Mothers handed their sons to the state at 7, whispering only, "Return with your shield or on it." That phrase wasn't empty pride. It was the end point of a culture that had erased maternal love and replaced it with fanatic devotion to Sparta's glory. If reproduction was the forging and inspection, the testing, then at 7 years old came assembly. From that age, a child was no longer his mother's son. He became property of the state. He was taken from his home, stripped of comfort, warmth, and affection, and delivered to the Agoge, Sparta's brutal training system, designed not to educate, but to erase weakness. Here childhood ended before it began. The boys slept on reed mats, ate scant meals, and endured beatings for the smallest mistakes. Hunger was not punishment, it was training. They were taught to steal food, but if caught, they were beaten not for theft, but for incompetence. Pain was their teacher, fear was their companion, and death was never far away. Every day was a test of endurance, of obedience, of silence. They learned to march barefoot through frozen ground, to fight without armor, to suffer without tears. The Agoge turned boys into weapons, sharp, efficient, and unfeeling. But training wasn't only physical, it was psychological warfare. They were taught to kill mercy within themselves, to see compassion as betrayal. Loyalty was reserved for one master, Sparta. They were divided into groups, watched constantly by older youths called erins, who acted as both mentors and tormentors. Through humiliation and hardship, the weak were broken or discarded. Only those who endured pain without complaint earned the right to stand among the living. At 12, they were given a single cloak, their only possession, and sent into the wilderness for days, sometimes weeks, to survive alone. No food, no shelter, no protection, only their cunning and strength. Many never returned. Those who did came back changed, not as boys, but as predators. And yet this was not the final test. At 20, the strongest were selected for the Krypteia, the secret police of Sparta's terror. Their mission to stalk the helots, the enslaved population, and kill any who appeared too bold, too strong, too alive. It was not war, it was culling, a ritual of dominance to remind the slaves who ruled them. To graduate from the Krypteia was to prove that one's heart no longer beat for pity. Only after surviving this darkness did a Spartan truly become what the state desired, not a man, but a perfect instrument of violence. At 30, he was allowed to live with his wife, to hold some semblance of family. Yet even then, he belonged not to her, but to the army. His life, his blood, his love, all belonged to Sparta. This was the price of perfection, a society without weakness, without compassion, without freedom, where every birth was a calculation, every death a necessity, and every heartbeat an offering to the state. The world would one day remember them as heroes, as legends who stood against impossible odds at Thermopylae. But behind the legend of the 300 lies the cost that history forgets. The souls sacrificed not on the battlefield, but long before, in the name of strength. Sparta did not create heroes, it manufactured them, and in doing so, it lost the very thing that makes us human.